Welcome to Sproutcast, where we speak with changemakers, social innovators, and entrepreneurs about how to make the world a better place. And now, here's your host, Julia Duffy.
Thank you for listening to Sproutcast. My name is Julia Duffy, and today I'm speaking with Warwick Peel, co-founder of the Future Directors Institute and startup Boardroom. We chat about the role of boards, the opportunities they provide to drive positive impact in social enterprise, and about empowering the next generation of directors. To hear more from Warwick Peel and 7 other fantastic entrepreneurs, join us at Sprout Summit 2017. You can watch the event online or attend in person on the 12th of October. Find out more at sprouthq.net. Thank you for joining me today, Warwick.
Thanks for having me.
Now, I was hoping you could start by briefly running us through some of the projects you're involved in and the work that you do, because I know you have a few different balls in the air and you hold a few different roles.
Yes, that's right, Julia. Well, look, I guess in regards to my focus, it's all about empowering the next generation into the boardroom in regards to Future Directors Institute and really just reframing the conversation around diversity in that it's not only a social construct in terms of what's better for society, but there's really just pushing the envelope in terms of the economic argument in that diversity is the anchor for better performance. And, you know, I also bring that sort of level of thinking and that capacity building mindset to the startup community. And my passion is social enterprise and social impact, whether that's anything from the big challenges of climate change and food security or through to the challenges in misguided youth and youth unemployment and some of the social challenges we have, not only here in Australia, but right across the world in terms of, bigger sort of challenging issues like poverty and hunger. So, yeah, look, that's sort of some of my passions and really my machinery to impact that is through people. And that's both in the boardroom and executives and really just changing the dialogue in as far as how non-executives can better perform and address some of these challenges of our time.
Excellent. And so I'm wondering if you could explore more why it is that you're interested in the role that the board plays and the influence that boards can have on how, I guess, the strategic vision or the future of an organisation is shaped. For someone who, perhaps is less familiar with the role of the board or hadn't considered a board role as something that might be suitable for them.
Yeah, look, good question. I guess in terms of when I think about it in the context of what isn't working, I'll talk to a couple of sort of metrics. One in that the globe's the biggest trust barometer is something called Edelman, which is effectively a global PR and comms company that states that 85% of society doesn't trust the government and doesn't trust big corporations. So I think in the context of where society is at in regards to their belief and hope in the system and the corporates that effectively drive change, they don't feel that it's being done well and they don't trust the system. Second to that is that an organisation called Gallup, which is a global human resources diagnostics organisation, states that 85% of employees are not thriving at work. They're not happy. Their well-being is suffering. And so my sort of focus is to try and help solve some of those problems. And I think it's systemic in that we've got going back into the 80s and 90s, Wall Street greed that drove a lot of this sort of profit-centric focus. It's about starting to have a bigger conversation and starting to understand some of the fundamentals of people, planet, profit, and some of the fundamentals of how we can apply a whole of stakeholder approach to governance really stems from what is broken, and the systems that are broken is really that mistrust, but also the fact that we're starting to see a shift in regards to a want and desire for companies to retain the best staff, is to provide an awesome workplace. And that starts with boards in regards to steering the executives to start thinking about culture and how we better enhance our employee experience. Second to that, it's about how we better serve our customers and better serve our stakeholders. And so, really it's not just about the lawyers, the investors, the ex-CEOs who have been purely concentrated on that bottom line. It's about opening up the conversation to realise that if we have a whole of stakeholder approach to governance, that's going to better serve our customers, better serve our community, and therefore deliver better investor returns. And it's about bringing that thinking to the boardroom, which is ultimately driving better performance.
And what does a board that's achieving these maybe slightly different types of objectives look like to you? Is it about the makeup of the board? Is it about their thinking or their training, or a combination of those factors?
Yeah, look, I think in terms of, if we think about an example of a successful Australian company who has really cemented themselves on the international stage, a number of people in the tech world know this organisation very well, and I would think that most of Australia would have heard of them. It's a company called Atlassian. And, Atlassian is ultimately a software company, but a company that through its growth and through its investors that came on board, hired a world-class board and brought global perspectives, brought about diversity in terms of the personnel on that board. They have multicultural diversity, intergenerational diversity, and of course, gender diversity. And 51% of this planet are female. So we've got to ask ourselves the questions, if 85% of the purchasing decisions in this world are made by women, why are they not on more boards? So someone like Atlassian, they've got all those elements of diversity, and they've brought about, that global mindset as well. They've got ex-executives and board members from the likes of LinkedIn, Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and then, in the investor world, bringing, the thinking of, Morgan Stanley, Bain Capital, these are global investment organizations, as well as then, the technology players that I just mentioned, and add into that the biggest antivirus company called Symantec. So it's about bringing world-class thinking and diversity of perspective into the boardroom, so that then we can challenge the organisation to not just think about a little island with 25 million people, but to think about the globe and 8 billion people. How can we change the dial? How can we change the game? And that starts from the boardroom. Either the fish rots from the head, or the executive will thrive from the questions that are asked from the boardroom.
And you mentioned earlier that you have a particular interest in social enterprises. So I was hoping we could continue on with the theme of governance and the role of boards, but perhaps what different role you think it might play in the social enterprise sphere, or perhaps challenges they're facing around governance in that sector?
Yeah, look, I think it's something that I've found my journey towards in regards to social enterprise. I've always been an entrepreneur, if not an intrapreneur, in my journey. And I think in terms of, having understood the capital markets as a headhunter and in executive search across investment markets in the earliest parts of my career, I understand that capital is the solution architecture for solving problems. And whether that's, looking at, and now I find myself on the board of the United Nations Association here in Victoria, and the architecture in which the UN talks to solving those problems is through the Sustainable Development Goals, and which are nicknamed the Global Goals. So for me, I see the entrepreneurs and the startups who are aiming at solving some of these social problems as the change agents that can deploy the technology and accelerate and amplify their impact in their chosen area of social change. So I think that's where my passion is for the social enterprise sector. I think the founder of the Skoll Foundation, who unfortunately passed away some 12 months ago, she said that it shouldn't be social entrepreneurship. It shouldn't be social enterprise. It should just be entrepreneurship. And I agree with that in one breath, but in the other breath, I look at it's about sort of the communication and the dialogue and the focus for entrepreneurs to solve real problems. So that's why I really embrace social enterprise, because they're ultimately solving a problem that exists in society And that ultimately, at some point in time, we get out of bed because we have purpose. We don't just get out of bed to spin another dollar. And, whether that arrives in our mindset at the age of 4 or 5, or it hits us in the face at 55 when we're nearing retirement, at some point it's purpose that drives us, and ultimately social enterprise, the fundamental existence of that organisation, purpose is at its core.
And what type of advice do you give to new social enterprises? Because although it is in some senses maybe the way of the future, it's also a very challenging environment that they're entering. So how do you kind of help, or what advice do you give to new organisations entering that sphere?
Yeah, look, Julia, in that regard, I think it comes down to my personal experiences and the life that I've led to date. I guess I was fortunate enough to be ambitious to take off to London early in my career, in my early 20s, and landed in a concrete jungle that is London, and was fortunate or misfortunate enough, whichever way you want to look at it, to have customers that were global investment banks and global fund managers and tier one global strategy firms. And I think that taught me that we are in it is a global game that we're playing. A lot of my clients, I was doing work mostly out of London, but sometimes in Europe, sometimes in the Middle East, and a little bit of stuff in the US. And so in returning home to Australia, and having travelled 5 continents and studied in Boston and done quite a bit of work in Asia, I guess all of that brings a global mindset, and it brings global reach perspective. And that's what I always ask of the founders, and really start to steer them to think big. Even BHP has recently rebranded their slogan to be think big. I think they're big enough, but look, that's what I bring to the founders. And I ask them to think laterally and think exponentially. So we, by nature of our survival instincts, we tend to try and stay in our comfort zone. I don't like playing in my comfort zone, because I just have always pushed myself, and that's how I operate, and that's why I find myself sometimes in tricky conversations with some big hitters punching way above my weight. But that's where I thrive, and that's how I've achieved what I have to date. And so for me, I always ask the founders to think big, think laterally and exponentially, because as we all know and we're all learning, that the magic happens when we're outside our comfort zone. And I think way too often I have this challenge with where Australia's at in the global game. And when I can only speak to one particular company like Atlassian, there's obviously a number of others that are performing well on the global stage as well. But too often we think about 4 banks, 3 energy companies, and 2 food suppliers who are all fighting over 25 million people. There's a much bigger game to play, and that's what I ask from founders. And what I bring to them is a connectivity of the right people, because cultures are ultimately the performance indicator of how far you're going to go. And so it's about connecting the dots and bringing them to think about who they could be speaking to that are going to help scale their enterprises into a bigger game.
A key challenge of social enterprise, but I guess also any new organisation, is finding and building and growing the right team. Now, I know you've worked with building teams and with building companies in the past. What would be your advice on maybe some ways to approach how to build and grow the right team for your organisation?
I think it's really important to identify the missing parts of the jigsaw. And in that, I mean not bringing about people like us on the journey. So, if you're an engineer, a software engineer or DevOps or what have you, and you're bringing you went to uni with another software engineer, that's not the ideal co-founders. The ideal co-founders have complementary skill sets and experience. They see the world differently. And so that brings about different perspectives. It brings about a different approach to be able to ideally scale the company and deploy those different skill sets and mindsets. And so it's all about capacity building and hiring the right people at the right time. So it's sometimes you really do need to go outside of your existing network to find the right people who are going to help you grow the company and bring that capacity building. And Julia, I'd like to add to that, one of the things that Startup Boardroom helps founders with is building their advisory boards. But rather than just simply, going back to a couple of senior executives who we know through our network, we ask the organisations about a hypothetical 5-year exit. If you were going to scale this company and take it to a trade sale to a bigger organisation in that same marketplace or in an adjacent market, what does your organisation look like in 5 years? What are the different products and services you have to add? What does your team look like? What are investor relations like? And start to think about the 5-year exit plan to then seek the right advisors that are going to take you on that journey. So we've also got to hire diverse skill sets and experiences into our founding team and our initial hires, and beyond that, we've also got to think about who we surround ourselves with. Because a big part of the journey, it's not just about the connectivity, the investment, and the right go-to-market and the right strategic partnership and the new market entry into international markets. But as founders, and what is becoming more and more known, is we have mental health challenges. For founders and startups, the fact that, the numbers are something between 87 and 95% fail. And so that's quite a brutal existence as a founder. It's quite a lonely existence. I've done it before, and I've been from startup through to exit in one of my companies previously, and that can be brutal. However, it helps when you've got the right support around you. Not only are they advisors in regards to asking the right questions to ensure that you're on track and ensure that you're accountable as an executive. However, they can also be that resilient support. And I think that's important because, you really do need the right types of mentors and the right types of coaches around you to help you through the tough times. Because just like any journey, whether you're in a big corporate, you're in a non-profit, or you're in a startup, there's always going to be challenges, and it's never going to be a straight line. So having the right support mechanisms around you is important. And at some point, it might be a loose mentor relationship, and that's healthy. At some point, really, the organizations, when they're going through this startup phase, entering into scale up, they need to get to really have a sophisticated advisory board around them so that there's a vested interest from those advisors. And that might be contrary to what I've been saying about, that whole sort of purpose and give back. But ultimately, we all want to be valued for our contribution and what we're bringing to the table. So I think that's an added piece of the jigsaw, is to, not only hire the right team, but hire the right advisors around us.
I think you can definitely have both of those elements at once, and that's part of, I guess, the beauty of social enterprise in particular.
Absolutely, and to that point, it's the great thing is with social enterprise is that it does tend to breed the fellow passionate and purpose-driven people. So you will tend to be able to find values-aligned people who are going to support you on the journey. That's somewhat different in the traditional startup space because there quite often can be vested interest, and the most important part of hiring anyone, whether it's a person to come on board and build the tech or it's an advisor, the most important part of the jigsaw is the culture fit, and the most important part of that is values alignment. So I guess in the social enterprise world, quite often the good thing is, those purpose-led and passionate people tend to be in the game.
And just to go into the detail briefly of advisory boards, because I know it's not something that necessarily all organisations would have, is it a kind of informal structure? And the role of the advisory board is obviously quite different than the governing board.
Yes. So, look, depending on where the organisation is at in their life cycle, and for most startups, look, you've just got to initially run hard. You don't want to be building an advisory board day dot, because you need to have made a few mistakes, at least try to, get your MVP in market and really start to build a business and get it beyond a I guess, rather than most viable product, it's, most viable concept that then becomes most viable product, that then becomes most viable business. And thinking about how to get your product or service in market. Once you get it in market, getting some traction, and then you start to think about, well, how do we innovate the business model? So in that early sort of initial sort of infancy stage of business, as a founder and co-founders, I think you'd have worked some of that out for yourself and have some mentors around you to support you. And once you start to get some traction in market, then that's probably a good time to start thinking about advisory board. The shift from advisory board to a more traditional board of directors or governance board can happen at any time. When I went through that journey, I had an advisory board for 6 months, and look, we were pretty fortunate enough to shout them breakfast once a month, and these individuals were more than happy to go over the P&L and balance sheet and keep us accountable to, the KPIs of the two co-founders and just ensure we were tracking well and that we were maintaining a healthy culture for our employees. And then that formalised into more of a board of directors where they had equity and that sort of thing. So, and then, ultimately that took us through to an exit. So, look, that was for me, it just happened as we grew and the timing was right. And we felt, our advisors had been awesome and it was a time that we were starting to grow in whole of Australia and do some work into the different markets. So it was just the right time. But I think it's, at the start, you've got to ask yourself, where are you now? Where do you want to be? And what does your ideal exit look like? And, look, there is sophistication in terms of going about building the right advisory board. And it's about, conducting that gap needs analysis around what skills and expertise, diversity and emotional intelligence is required on your advisory board. And you have to look across all facets of your business: customer development, product development, brand development and marketing, investment, fundraising, legal compliance, business model development and strategy, domain expertise, finance, and then, human capital, team building and that culture piece. So there's quite as we go on and business models and business becomes so much more sophisticated, we're going to continuously require diversity in the boardroom to unlock the potential to realise and extract value from the executives and the co-founders, but ultimately to steer these organisations onto the global stage. I think it's great that, certain social enterprises are very niche and solving a problem in our local communities. Ultimately, we've got some pretty big challenges ahead. When we talk about the big macro problems like, all of those SDGs into one big bucket called the global goals, there's some enormous problems we need to solve. So, for me, I aim to empower and create a global perspective for founders to tackle some of these big problems. And I think that the big thinkers, in regards to the right advisors around you, they'll help do the same for founders.
Now, before I let you go, I want to give you the opportunity to give a shout out to an organisation or a company or a person who you think is doing great work in the sector that we might not know about.
Well, look, Julia, in terms of myself, I must admit I wipe my bum with Who Gives a Crap that supports sanitisation in Africa. I drink Good Beer Company, that 50% of profits go back to the reef. And I'm sure we all know about those organisations. And, of course, Thank You Group. We always wash our hands and put those nappies on our kids. But one that really, for me, I love the organisation that is Foundation for Young Australians, and their Y Lab is an awesome organisation in itself in scaling social enterprise. So, look, there's plenty of ultra cool social enterprise within the portfolio. But what I want to mention is, and I've mentioned that I'm obviously passionate about our environment and climate change, and there's an organisation called Clean Coast Collective. Daniel Smith, he's a young entrepreneur from Byron Bay, and I'm heading up there in a few weeks to go on holiday. I don't know whether I'll catch up with him when I'm up there, but he's doing some awesome stuff in terms of stopping plastic pollution in our oceans. And just wanted to, my shout out today is to Clean Coast Collective and Daniel Smith, the founder there.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And where can people find you or Future Directors Institute or Startup Boardroom online if they want to find out more about what you do?
Yeah, so Startup Boardroom, we're all about empowering founders to help them scale globally and connect them to investors. Startupboardroom.com.au. And Future Directors Institute is not only about empowering the next generation in the boardroom, but to retrain the brain for existing directors to help them better perform in the new economy. And futuredirectors.com.au, soon to be futuredirectors.global, as we enter the Singapore and US markets next month via our e-learning products, which is pretty exciting too. So I'm practicing what I preach when I say we need to think global. We're starting our own journey on that front, Julia.
Excellent. Well, it's been great to have you on the show today, Warwick. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me. Great times.
Are you an emerging leader or social entrepreneur who has started or wants to be involved in a not-for-profit, social enterprise or business for good? Join us at Sprout Summit 2017. The aim of Sprout Summit is to equip social entrepreneurs and change makers with the practical tools, processes and insights to drive successful change and create positive impact in society. We'll be featuring an exciting lineup of speakers, including Warwick Peel, with experience starting some of Australia's most innovative not-for-profits, social enterprises and for-purpose businesses. You can attend in person in Melbourne on the 12th of October or stream the event from wherever you are in the world. Find out more at sprouthq.net.
Did you enjoy this episode of Sproutcast? Visit sproutcast.net to sign up for our newsletter. The newsletter includes copies of the show notes and additional content from each episode.